Hey YouTube, this is Steve from Average Joe's Fantasy Football, and week 2 of the NFL season has pretty much come to an end. Obviously, there's a Monday night game tonight, so we'll see how things play out with the Falcons and Eagles. Hopefully, it is a great game. But again, another week has gone by. We've got some great fantasy football that had gone on this past weekend, some great games as well. And of course, there were some players that may have been maybe not so great, right? Again, we're only in week 2, but these are some players that I may or may not be panicking for this season. So let's check it out. So I have 5 players that I'm going to mention that are players that I've had people ask about what to do with. Even though we are in week 2, I wanted to kind of go over players that I'm panicking about, or maybe I'm not panicking about, and I kind of want to go into detail. Again, only 5 players. There's probably a lot more on this list, but I wanted to keep it simple and sweet for everybody. Just, again, there are going to be some big names on here, maybe some names you haven't thought about. But the first one I'm going to bring up is Brock Purdy. Look, I understand Brock Purdy is not a name that most people have thought about when it comes to the fantasy quarterbacks. Typically quarterbacks like Josh Allen and Mahomes and, Stroud and obviously Lamar, like typically your top tier quarterbacks. Now, Purdy had an amazing season last year. And he, of course, again, went into this season as someone that could possibly be in the top 10 or 12. And with that said, he was pre-ranked as quarterback 12 coming into the fantasy season for most of the community. So in 2 games, though, he has only averaged 12 points a game. He's only thrown 1 touchdown, which was this past Sunday. Obviously an interception as well. He's not looked great. He looks uncomfortable. He looks like he's not reading the routes right. It's just, there's a lot missing. Now, part of what I think is Brandon Ayuk obviously had missed time over the summer in training camp and preseason. That's obviously a big factor, and I think that plays a factor. Christian McCaffrey not being in there could possibly also play a factor. But again, Jordan Mason's done a really good job filling in while Christian McCaffrey is on IR. So I don't know if that's completely the reason. Now, am I panicking on Brock Purdy? No. He's had a few tough matchups. Again, adjusting, with Brandon Ayuk missing time, that's going to take some. And I think the whole offense in general has just had to adjust while Christian McCaffrey is now dealing with the injury. So I think this is kind of as a whole. They obviously lost to Minnesota. Not many people had anticipated that because they had dominated in week 1 against the Jets, who people had high hopes for. So again, I'm not panicking for Brock Purdy. Has he looked great? No. I do think he's got a couple more games that he might have some head scratchers, but he's got a great schedule coming up between weeks 5 and 12. He's got a pretty soft schedule, so he may end up really surprising most people. So my panic meter is pretty low on him. Now, the next player I want to mention is going to be Jerome Ford for the Cleveland Browns. In 2 games, he's averaged only 12.5 points, and 18 of them came on week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys, where he scored a touchdown at the end of the game, near the end of the game, and it was a blowout. That touchdown absolutely saved him. Had he not had that, it would have been nasty so far for Jerome Ford. And part of the nervousness that I have with Jerome Ford is he may end up in a committee until Nick Chubb comes back, because Nick Chubb is expected to obviously be back soon. My panic is a little high. I do worry for Jerome Ford, anybody who's got him right now. If you can possibly get rid of him, do it. I know it's hard. I think this week is the week that I think he ends up having a decent game because he's got a really, really good matchup. And then maybe if you hold him this week and he has a good matchup, then you move on. That might be the time to sell him. But my panic meter is pretty high for Jerome Ford because in this past Sunday's game, he had 7 carries and Deontay Foreman had 14. That's something that I did not anticipate at all. I get week 1 script was a little different, but he still finished with over 18 points in fantasy. But this one was nasty. And so there is some concern with him. Again, you may want to hold on to him, see how he does in this matchup week 3. If he ends up performing pretty well, then you've got to get rid of him because at that point, his value is not there. Another running back I want to mention is going to be Zamir White for the Raiders. He came into the league as far as pre-ranked as RB22. So again, a low-end RB2, which is expected. I was not super high on him, and right now he's currently nowhere near that performance of an RB2. He's averaged 5 points a game, Yeah, you heard me. 5 points a game in fantasy. He's had a total of 22 carries in those 2 games. He does not look great. He does not look explosive. He looks heavy. He doesn't read his blocks well. And it looks like right now the Raiders are also using Alexander Mattison in this. And there's a possible chance where it really truly becomes a full committee in that backfield. So is there panic? Absolutely. I am absolutely panicking for anybody who's got Zamir White, or at least treating Zamir White as an RB2. Because unless you're in really deep leagues, I would say maybe 14, 16 leagues or deep rosters, maybe Zamir White might have still some value on your roster. But anything that's 12 team or less and you don't have a huge amount of, roster space, I would panic right now if I'm a Zamir White owner. Another panic I have, and it's probably going to be, again, not too shocking, is I've got Michael Pittman as a good panic this week. 12 points in 2 games. That's it. 12 points in 2 games. It's not going to help you win in fantasy football at all. And, for someone who's the number 1 receiver on the Indianapolis Colts, he was a great receiver last season in fantasy. He finished top 24. Pittman has struggled. He's seen about 15 targets so far in the 2 games, so it's not horrible. Not the greatest. I would love to see more, but 15 targets isn't horrible for a wide receiver. But in those 2 games, he is just not capitalizing on it. A lot of it I do contribute to the Colts' air attack in general. My panic meter is still pretty high in him because Richardson right now, as far as his quarterback, does not look like a great passer. And even in the fantasy side, I'm a little worried for Anthony Richardson because his real caveat in this is the fact that he can run the ball. He's obviously got an arm, but he's not throwing the ball down the field. And if he does, it's very inaccurate. And Michael Pittman is not the type of receiver that can make up for some of that issue. Pittman needs a consistent quarterback, which is why I thought, again, did really well with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. And him and Anthony Richardson just have not been on the same page. So at this point, it's going to be tough to get rid of Michael Pittman, but I am in absolute panic right now mode for him because I don't know how much value you're going to have him, and I don't think he's going to get any better. Now, my number 1 player that I have as a panic right now is Ja'Marr Chase. Look, he's a big name here. I get it. He has not played very well so far. He's had 19 points in 2 games. For everyone who's drafted him in the first round, your expectations are obviously very high, and he is nowhere near that. And most people who probably have Ja'Marr Chase may even end up being on the losing side of fantasy football so far in the first 2 weeks. Hopefully you have not, but there's a chance. Look, he's came into the season as wide receiver 5. He's an elite talent. But man, does he look like he's not having fun. He's struggling right now. And I think the Bengals in general are struggling. They're 0-2 right now. Do I think they should have won against the Chiefs? Absolutely, but it just didn't happen. But here's my thing. I'm not fully panicking on Ja'Marr Chase. My panic meter's still there. It's probably, if we're talking a level 1 to 10, I'm probably about a level 3.5, 4, because there is some concerns. I think part of it is it's going to take some time. And that's the reason why I'm not panicking on him, because of the fact that I do think him missing training camp, missing this offseason, not being able to be around the team, not being around Joe Burrow. And of course, I think he misses his counterpart in T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins not being there has allowed defenses to really focus on Chase. And it's just, you can see the frustration in him. He's had some issues so far the first 2 games. So right now I'm holding on to Ja'Marr Chase. Now the flip side is if you're someone who's looking to possibly try to take advantage of a Ja'Marr Chase owner who's kind of unsure what to do, you could probably get him at a good price. Now I'm not saying you're going to get him cheap, but maybe you can get him a player like, I'm trying to think of some receivers, maybe Olave or Drake London or somebody, who's probably had some decent games so far. That's better. That maybe someone's considering. It's going to be a little bit of a stretch, but again, he's going to be a tough one. Now, I do have a bonus player that I want to mention just because someone brought this up in some, reached out in X as far as what's going on. But Christian Kirk for the Jaguars. And I know he's not the biggest name. I know he's not a receiver that a lot of people went after, but he is the number 1 wide receiver for the Jaguars. And I think that might change with Brian Thomas. Kirk has seen 7 targets only in 2 games. He's had 2 catches. That's it. 2 catches with 29 yards. And this past Sunday, he had 1 catch with a negative yard. So Trevor Lawrence's favorite receiver is not looking like his favorite receiver right now. And that Jaguars offense in general doesn't look great. I think Brian Thomas actually is going to end up taking this job. So again, that Brian Thomas buying window or trading for has pretty much disappeared, even though he hasn't been amazing. He's had some good games, but Christian Kirk is definitely a bonus panic that I'm a little nervous for. So those are some players that I wanted to mention, kind of again, talk about some players that I think you should panic or maybe have a little bit less stress. Don't stress it too much. We are only in week 2, but these are players that if you could possibly move away from, or again, maybe some players that you think you might have a chance of getting at a decent price, then you could kind of pull that trigger. So if you guys haven't already, make sure you guys check out my other videos I will be pushing out this week. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and I'll check you guys out next time.